come in and take a seat.
If they don't want to be quiet, then shut the doors.
Yeah. All right, at this time, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Jeff McMillan, who is our Fisheries Management Committee Chairman. Mr. Jeff.
Thank you, Chairman Griggs. This time I'm going to ask Chief of Fisheries Division, Bobby Wilson, to discuss with us our proclamation for sports fishing for this year.
Thank you, Commissioner McMillan. Hang on. Okay, at the August Commission meeting in Jackson, we presented several recommendations on sport fish, and really for the recommendations I'm showing today are the same recommendations that we presented for preview at the August Commission meeting. So I'm just going to go over those. First of all, the snapping turtles. If you remember, at the last Commission meeting in September, we discussed commercial fishing, and we had some regulation changes for a few places that were going to be closed for snapping turtle harvest for commercial fishing. We're going to recommend that we close those same areas to sport fish harvest of snapping turtles. Sport fishermen can keep 5 snapping turtles a day. They have to be 12 inches. The carapace has to be 12 inches in length too. But John Tully Wildlife Management Area is one of the areas that we close for commercial fish. We're requesting to close this for sport harvest because of the snapping turtle project that we're working on, as well as Cove Lake State Park, not too far from here. In Region 1, I'll go over these recommendations again. Up in West Tennessee, Carroll County Lake. It's not a TWRA lake. It's it's owned and operated by the Carroll County Watershed Authority. It's fairly recently opened. It's been stocked with Florida bass and with northern bass. It has some good growth rates on the fish so far. Typically what we do in our smaller lake management, like our agency lakes, start off with a high length limit on largemouth bass. That's what I'm going to talk about. Currently there is an 18-inch length limit on largemouth bass at Carroll County Lake. We want to try to reduce some of the smaller fish because we're concerned about overcrowding, as well as advance some of the bigger fish. So we're recommending a 14 to 18-inch PLR, which stands for Protected Length Range. A lot of people know it as a slot limit. So if you look at the 18 and there's a 14, there'll be no harvest between 14 and 18, but there would be a 5 bass limit, only one of which may be over 18. So you could have, you could have 4 under 14 or 5 under 14 or 4 under 14 and 1 over 18. That's the recommendation. Skip over to Region 3. In the southeast part of the region, we're talking about the Tellico River. We want to shift the delayed harvest zone upstream from North River to the state line. And this will help eliminate stakeholder overlap between anglers and paddlers. Also help with confusion related to the delayed harvest zone being in the middle of the areas that occur, where harvest can occur. In addition, Green Cove Pond is located in that general vicinity, not too far from the Tellico trout hatchery. Currently, only individuals that are juveniles or over the age of 65 can fish there, but we don't really specify the license types for other types that might be eligible. We say we don't have a definition of handicap, so we want to include these specific types of licenses: 189, 198, 197, 199, and 169. And also we wanted to recommend to prohibit the use of boats at Green Cove Pond because it's only a 2.5 acre pond and it's just not a very big pond for boats to be on. So we recommended to prohibit the use of boats at Green Cove Pond as well. Also in Region 3, Dale Hollow Lake area, in the East Fork of the OB River, currently we have a regulation on walleye where from January 1 to April 30th, you're only allowed 1 hook or 1 lure with a single hook. And that's to restrict the snagging of walleye because they make these runs up into the East Fork of the OB River to spawn. or to attempt to spawn, and they're very vulnerable to snagging, and so we have this regulation in place for that. We want to change that. We're just going to reduce it by a couple of weeks to January 1 through April 15th. And usually the walleye run is over by mid-April and it's followed by an excellent white bass run. This will improve angler access to the white bass run using small lures and spinners and crankbaits. Also in that section of the river, only from January 1 to April 15th, we recommend that only one walleye over 20 inches be allowed to harvest. This represents the best potential for natural reproduction, protects native walleye. The creel limit will remain 5, but only one walleye over 20 inches may be in an angler's possession. In Region 4, not very far from here, Greene County, Dillard Place ponds. As you recall from a presentation that was given several months ago, this was at one time was some private land, and a lot of work was done by various entities, including the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency, the Cherokee National Forest folks, and others to try to make this a more accessible place to fish, as well as for ADA angling opportunities. So we recommended, there were no regulations, so we just have a few recommendations that would be open 1/2 hour before sunrise to 1/2 hour after sunset, and limit of 4 trout per day, no length limit. Only 1 pole or rod per person. Those are the regulations that we proposed last year. In addition, we have a couple of small minor additions that we'd like to make to the proclamation. Down in that same area, the southeast corner of the state in Region 3, there are the Conn River drainage. It's not very much of it in the state of Tennessee. Most of it goes down into Georgia, but there's a portion of it, and plus the creeks and the watershed itself lies within Tennessee. A fish called a shadow bass, very similar to the rock bass, but it's a different species. So we're going to add that as a species that's legal to be harvested for that just particular watershed. And as well, as you know, we have the spotted bass as native to Tennessee. There's also the Alabama bass, which has been illegally introduced in part of our state, and it seems to be spreading and impacting, but currently there's no legal, we don't define legally as the Alabama bass to be able to be harvested from the water, so we want to include that as a species of fish that can be harvested as well. Also, let me, while I've got your attention about the Alabama bass, you may recall a couple of years ago, a presentation was given about the Alabama bass, and mostly they're in this small reservoir in Region 3 called Parksville Reservoir. It's less than 2,000 acres. It's basically the Ocoee River, the impoundments of the Ocoee River. And the Alabama bass was discovered there a few years ago. And in fact, the current state record was 6 pounds, 7 ounces was caught there just below the dam there. And it was proven to be an Alabama bass. And most of the spotted bass collected in a joint effort in 2010 from Parks were the Alabama bass. And this was a graph that, as you can see, it only goes to 2011, but the blue line indicates largemouth bass that were the percent of largemouth of the black bass that were caught by electrofishing. In 2005, that when we first started seeing these, at the time we called them spotted bass because we weren't sure that what species they were. We knew they looked different, but then we found out later these spotted bass used to be called the Alabama spotted bass, and more recently they've been identified as a separate species. They're called the Alabama bass. They're not part of a spotted bass. They're the Alabama bass. 2007, you can see they started taking over in 09 and 11, so that the Alabama bass is now the predominant black bass species in Parksville Reservoir. So we have regulations in place to try to encourage the harvest of those from that lake. Our concern is that, number one, as you can see, they're out competing the largemouth bass, which is a more desirable species, but not just for Parksville Lake, but for waters beyond. I borrowed these slides from a Georgia fisheries biologist who talked about 3 reservoirs in North Georgia, Blue Ridge, Nottely, and Chattooga. And they're, as you can see, they're real close to the Tennessee as well as to the North Carolina border. And so this is their slide again. It's trying to just showing the difference between the two. They're very similar in appearance, and they're kind of hard to tell apart. But there are some identifying features that you can tell to distinguish the two. But just knowing that they're there is the biggest thing. So this is another one of their slides. It was Blue Ridge. They first started seeing in this slide, they call it SPB, that stands for spotted bass, but it's the Alabama bass. This is before we knew that it was going to be a separate species. And the green line, the largemouth bass, and the blue line, smallmouth. Well, the spotted bass started showing up in 1999, 2000, and for the last 7 years, they've really dramatically increased in numbers so that the smallmouth bass are dwindling and the largemouth bass as well. So the Alabama spotted bass seems to be taking over. Chattooga is even worse, with the smallmouth bass being completely eliminated due to the Alabama bass in that reservoir. And largemouth bass are being displaced as well. In Nottely, the other on one of those lakes we talked about, the same things happen there with the Alabama bass taking over there. So our concern about these lakes, about this species of fish is, I mean, even though it got 6 pounds, 7 ounce, and that's a good fish, don't get me wrong, I'm sure everybody, fishermen would love to catch a fish that big, but as you can see from what's going on down there in those 3 lakes, our concern is that they get into the other water systems that we have, and for the smallmouth bass, and they will eventually take over and displace our native fish. In fact, Georgia's considering stocking largemouth bass and stocking smallmouth bass in lakes that used to have them there in pretty good numbers. And ramifications, they could be over all the Tennessee Valley, all the Tennessee river system. So we'll probably put some effort into some PR work into trying to discourage fishermen from taking these fish from places like Parksville Lake and moving them to other parts or other lakes that we have in our state. Even though they produce a bigger spotted bass type fish, we're really concerned about how it could impact our smallmouth bass and largemouth bass populations. And that's all I've got. Any questions?
That's all you got?
That's all I got today.
You got a chair? I'm just
Yeah,
kidding.
some water.
Chairman, Bobby, we have spoken before about the Alabama strain of largemouth bass. That's a whole different,
Well, no, we've
Species.
talked before about the Alabama, what we thought was the Alabama strain of the spotted bass, and then we've talked about the Florida strain of the largemouth
Okay,
bass.
all right.
Right.
all right, thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay, do we have questions for,
I got one.
okay?
I'm not sure if this is an oversight or not, Bobby, but you've got some existing regulations and a change in a regulation for blue catfish of no length limit. And I think the state law for catfish is 1/36.
Except where indicated otherwise. Those are our agency lakes, I think that you're referring to.
Yeah.
And that was never intended to try to create a trophy catfish fishery in our agency
So
lakes.
the law exempts these particular lakes?
When
or-
we specify exemptions, that overrides the statewide regulation.
Okay. Just trying to make sure you're not being sneaky.
Not me. What does he say?
Are there any, yes, ma'am?
What you say, the Alabama bass is not as desirable as the largemouth bass. Is that because of the size? It's not a good,
No, the reason is, of our concern, that it will displace the smallmouth bass and even largemouth bass in some of our populations.
were they native to Alabama? Is that why you called Alabama?
Well, they were. Yeah, that's where they're found mostly in the I can't remember what drainage it is. Thank you, Coosa River drainage.
And do they displace the largemouth and smallmouth bass there in Alabama?
I don't think so. I think they've learned they've adapted in those water systems. They naturally, because that's where they were found.
Why would they do something different 50 miles north of where they're, I don't understand.
Yeah.
Well, they put into I don't know exactly if this is the right answer, but a closed environment that had the smallmouth and largemouth bass population. And typically when a non-native species is introduced, like the Asian carp, for example, they just take off. And they outcompete the native species. I don't know why other than that, I don't know why they're overtaking in those reservoirs we mentioned, but they are.
So is it predation or are they competing for the same food or what?
They compete for the same food. They probably, we know that spotted bass, and I'm sure the Alabama bass may be similar, they predate on other black bass like largemouth bass and smallmouth bass.
So do you think when you're talking about wanting to put them as a sport fish to regulate, or are you gonna try to catch more of them? Or
Well,
control them?
we do. We have a regulation in place that allows greater harvest of those from Parksville Reservoir than normal. Normally, the statewide regulation for what we call black bass is largemouth, smallmouth, and spotted bass is 5 bass per day, except where otherwise indicated. I know we have Parksville Lake. I think it's 15. I'm not 100% sure on that. And then Norris Lake is another example where we've determined that the spotted bass, not the Alabama bass, but the spotted bass, are not as desirable. They don't get as big. They consume and predate upon smallmouth bass. So we have an increased creel limit in that lake too. So that's one way to do it. The big thing we're trying to do is discourage fishermen from moving them from like Parksville Lake, where we know they are, to any other body of water. That's the thing we're going to be pushing. I just want to bring it to your attention. We don't have anything out here now, a regulation, but we may put wanted posters up or something like that. We don't know yet what we're going to do.
Mr. Chairman, the gentleman here raised his hand.
Well, we're going to stay with the commission first, and then I'll go to the audience if you don't care. Is there any other comments from the commission? Okay, then we'll entertain questions from the, okay. That's up to you.
Do I need to make an amendment now to this, or do we need to approve it and make an amendment?
We haven't really voted on the proclamation, so we can't amend it till we
Okay.
vote on it, correct?
All right.
Is there any, so I need to go to the discussion for the audience first for questions from Bobby. Do I have anybody from the audience that has a question for Bobby? Okay, well, in that case, at this time, I'll entertain a motion for Proclamation 1417 for sport fishing for 2015.
So move.
Do I have a second? Okay, then we'll have re-entertain the discussion. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I'd like to make an amendment to the sport fish proclamation to change the size limit on smallmouth bass on Cherokee, Douglas, and Fort Loudon Tellico to 5 fish at 15 inches.
Cherokee, Douglas, and
Tellico Loud.
Tellico Loudon
Yes.
to reduce it from, what, 20 to 15 on Douglas
Yep.
and 18 to 15 on Cherokee and Tellico Loudon.
Yes.
Okay. All right, before we vote on that, we need to have discussion from the commission. We have to second the amendment? Really? Before we vote on it? All right, do I have a second? Okay, we have a. On the amendment or? On the amendment. No, we've already voted. We've already got a motion on the proclamation. We just need a second motion on the amendment. Do I have a second on the amendment? All right, we have a second from Mr. Rock, Commissioner Rice. So we'll discuss that. What questions do we have for Chief Wilson concerning this amendment?
One for Fisher Parker. She wanted to up the slot limit,
Baker.
not the slot limit, but the creel limit from 1 to 5.
Yes.
I don't know. Okay.
I'd like to know from Chief Wilson what your opinion of this is.
Well, we've discussed this, and I've got a couple of concerns. One is we don't have a lot of biological data on smallmouth bass from all three of those reservoirs to make a recommendation. Typically, when our fisheries biologists sample in the springtime mostly for largemouth bass, they do it in late April or May or in that time period. By that time, the smallmouth bass that are in those reservoirs will have already gone back to deeper water. The largemouth are up there in shallower water preparing to spawn or maybe spawning. And so we get a pretty good sample of those. So to try to get a better idea of the smallmouth bass population, we try to go a little bit earlier. And we target the smallmouth bass in maybe March, for example. When the smallmouth bass are in the shallow water, we get a better sample. We not only get better numbers to indicate the size distribution of the population, but we also can get some information on age and growth, whether the smallmouth are growing as well as expected or better than average or not as good, whether they will live long enough to get to whatever length limit we have. We've got the information recently, I think, on Douglas Reservoir, but not on Cherokee or Fort Loudon Tellico. And that's one aspect. The other is public input on this. Typically when we have issues or we have questions that we want to ask fishermen, the best way for us to get is through surveys. And one of the best ways for us to get a good number and unbiased survey is through our creel survey program. And when the creel clerks can ask anglers, for example, how they feel about our regulations, if they're happy with it, the way we manage the fish population, or maybe if we have a specific regulation like a 15-inch change to 15, we would ask how they would feel about that. We don't have any gauge for that at all. And then the final thing would be if a recommendation was put forth, we would like to get some put out to the public for comments, to hear back from them to see how they feel about it.
Okay, does anybody have any comments or questions from the commission for Bobby concerning this? Jeff,
Talking about the public, I mean, is there a procedure now that we need to look at before we,
well,
as far as letting the public be involved?
I think anytime you're gonna amend something of this magnitude, I think the public needs to be informed, and we've done that in the past, and I think it needs to be done in this stage too. I guess my comment is, we're on the day we're supposed to set it, and there's been some discussion about this, but it hasn't been, I guess in my opinion, properly advertised that this is what that the agency or the commission is thinking. I guess my comment before is if we were to say make a public comment period between now and December, can the publication for fisheries still be printed in time for when the new regulations take effect? Does anybody have that answer?
Yes, it can. That's cutting it close, but December it would be able. Any changes could still be made by December in order to make it to the fishing guide for the March 1 regulations of 2015.
So in your opinion, thank you, Bobby, on that, but your opinion is you feel comfortable with doing this for Douglas, but you would like definitely like more time for Cherokee and Tellico Loudon?
Well, I'd like more time for all three, but we do have the biological data for Douglas, and we don't have it on Cherokee or Fort Loudon Tellico.
Does the biological data state that with this change in regulation would not affect the resource?
Well, the resource will be there. It's just the quality of the smallmouth bass fishery. It could impact that. We know that from the biological data that we collected from Douglas that currently it has a 20-inch length limit with a creel of 1 on Douglas for smallmouth. And we know that there's not a lot of fish smallmouth bass live to make it over the 20. So a reduction would be something that we were looking at anyway. Maybe not 15, but we were looking at another, at reducing that.
Do you know what you were looking at too? Was it to 18 also? Or?
It was 18.
Okay. Is there any other comments from the commission?
Bobby, we had a public meeting there back earlier down in Knoxville. and you stated then that the growth rate at Douglas was the same growth rate at South Holston.
Actually, I didn't say that, but we did.
Yes,
Yeah.
the agency did.
Yes.
And you also stated, I mean, by your own records, that we were at, right now, we were able to harvest 3% of the population at Douglas. And because me and you had talks about it, I asked you to look at it, that when we move that, if we move that size limit back to 15, that then the anglers of the state of Tennessee would be able to harvest 15% of the population and not impact the resource as far as the spawning availability of the fish.
Well, 15-inch smallmouth bass will spawn, and one of the reasons that we have the bigger length limits, 18-inch smallmouth will produce more eggs. Number one, be in the system a little longer, spawn more than just once or twice like a 15-inch would. Just because we remove that length limit down to say 15, for example, it doesn't mean there's still going to be a lot of 16, 17, 18-inch smallmouth bass in there. They will be caught, and some will be harvested, some will die from mortality, from hook mortality, from being in a live well for a long time, and especially in the summertime. So we do anticipate that size distribution to change. It won't stay the same, but it'll be great for a couple of years, but it'll change after just a few years. We're pretty sure of that.
Well, I know like South Holston and Watauga, for example, real small reservoirs in relationship to Douglas and Cherokee, and they get a tremendous amount of pressure. If we've got the same growth rate at one as we do the other, and there's several people in this room here that spent a lot of time on both of these lakes, or all these lakes up here, we are seeing tremendous jumps in the smallmouth population at Cherokee and Douglas and Tellico Lab.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the reason I'd like to see this change.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Cannon?
Okay.
Sure.
Acknowledging I'm not on the committee, but just from the outside looking in on the committee discussion, this may be the right thing to do, but it's very similar, I would offer, to our discussion on deer harvest earlier this year, where it's a very significant change is being considered without the opportunity for public input. It sounds like that if the committee acted on this, whether today or the commission as a whole, in December, there would be time to get the regulations out. Just my encouragement is that I hope the committee will consider giving the public that opportunity, because I consider this a pretty significant change.
I agree, and that's why I asked the question about the publication, because if the publication couldn't wait another month, then we wouldn't even consider it. But I think that we've gotten in maybe uneasy waters when we haven't given proper notice before, and so I do agree with that. I think what we're trying to determine right now is it something that we want to do? Is the agency comfortable, or does the commission feel like that there's enough information that we can go forward, at least put it out? If we put it out that's what we're considering, it doesn't mean that's what we're going to do, but we'd like to have the public comment, and then and by December 5th, I think that's the next meeting, then we could certainly vote on that. But obviously, we're going to have motions and a vote for that. But I think that's where, I think that as being a commission, being responsible, I think that's what we would have to do. I don't in any tent I want to discourage that we would vote on that today. Yes, sir.
I would just like to stress too that the issue of public comment is very important, and we need to make sure we do that before we look at this amendment or change how the public comment.
Yes, sir.
So what we're looking at is tabling the amendment until December? Is that what we're saying?
Table the entire proclamation.
Everything? Okay.
Yeah.
Until
we decide if we're going to amend it, as it's been stated. It's been out there as Commissioner Baker is wanting to amend it to reduce the
right.
maximum size.
Right.
So on 3 lakes.
So let me be clear. So we're looking for public comment, and that's this month, or the month of November, and then voting in December. We're also saying that the pamphlets, there are things that'll be printed up, we don't have a problem with that. The deadline is after that, correct? So what do we do now as far as, do we
We're
pull
not.
back our motions? Do we,
No, we're not ready. I think we're still discussing if we're even gonna do it, because I still have the audience to make their comments.
Right.
Is there anybody else in the commission that wants to discuss it?
I'm kinda iffy on, like Bobby said, they've done some research on Douglas, and we've got information on it. The other three that we don't know anything about.
We've got a little bit of information. We don't have as much information to give us confidence to make any kind of recommendation as like we do at Douglas.
Impact the resource when we don't have any biological information to back it up, so.
Are you,
That's what I'm saying about the,
I mean,
I didn't make the motion on it.
well, obviously, we're talking about going from 18 to 15 on two lakes, but 20 to 15 on Douglas.
Correct.
In your opinion, is that too big a jump on the Douglas Lake?
Well, we were considering going to 18, and we withdrew that. We decided not to go with that, go forth with that. But that's a big jump. But if that's the will of the commission.
Okay.
Question.
Yes, sir.
The information that you're looking for to make this decision, a recommendation on Fort Loudon and Cherokee, how long will it take you to get that information?
We'll get it this spring. No, this spring of 2015, yeah. And we also are going to be redirecting some of our creel clerks to conduct surveys on those reservoirs as well this spring.
I'm not on the committee, but I think it's, it's worth discussing, worth delaying a month to see what the public thinks about it and discuss it and vote on either all three or just Douglas in December.
Any other comments from the commission? I'll refer to the audience. Anyone from the audience want to comment on what this discussion is?
I'd like to ask,
Could you stand up and state your name, please, sir?
ask the commission, Bill Jenkins, how would the commission go about getting the public input in like a month? How would you go about, as far as a lot of anglers are off the water now, season's winding down. How would you go about asking the public and getting the information you need from the public at this point?
Do you want to answer that, Chief?
I'm not sure if I'm qualified as well as
Who would?
I&E, but I can try. I can attempt. We would probably, as we do, is send it out, a news release, and then post it on our website. We don't always get newspapers to publish our news releases, but we might try to encourage and make a special effort to get the local newspapers in the affected area here, especially, to publish that so that we can get public comment. And then we'll put on there an address for them to send their comments to, or an email address, which is what we have most nowadays, is email addresses.
Do you have a suggestion about how we could do that?
Well, I'm not really, because I think you get a bias, one way or the other versus the fishermen that buy the tackle, the equipment, the sportsman's license versus the bank fisherman. And I'm not putting any fisherman, has got the right to the resource, but I think you have a bias as far as when you collect that information from people, a lot of people that eat these fish. And I fished here all my life since I was a little boy. And I know a lot of meat eaters that don't even look at those regulations, and get checked very little on the lake. They're out fishing, they go Monday through Thursday, and nobody's out there checking them, and they just harvest these fish. They don't worry about size. If it makes a fillet, a lot of times they just take them. Where most of your sport fishermen that spend the money on the tackle, that keep the businesses going, the boat sales, and stuff like that, they really, they take care of these fish. That's their resource. That's what they like to do. That's why they spend the money to do it. To where a lot of the meat eaters, they don't spend no money. And, they impact the resources. I would say far greater than most of your bass fishermen, that target that one species. I think there needs to be something, I don't know the right thing to do. I mean, as far as getting the information, but I think the public, as far as most of your sport fishermen that fish these tournaments and pursue the spotted bass, the largemouth bass, and the smallmouth bass, spend the majority of the money in the resource. That's my comment.
Thank you, sir. Does anybody else from the audience have a comment or question? Yes, sir. If you'd come up and state your name.
If I don't fall down here. Hello, gentlemen. My name is Carl Guffey. I'm the Conservation Director for the Tennessee Bass Federation. Federation. If I could have just a moment for a second. Ms. King, the reason there are no interaction between smallmouth and Alabama bass on the Coosa River chain is there are no smallmouth bass there. It's spotted bass or largemouth. And also on that same chain, where the two interact, largemouth and Alabama bass, generally there are areas that spread out into very shallow water around the reservoir. So there's no problem with them mingling while they're spawning or while they're chasing food. In the upper East Tennessee Valley, most of the lakes are like this. There are no flat areas for the largemouth to get into. And in particular, in Georgia, on Lake Allatoona, they can't find their largemouth bass anymore because of an introduction of spotted bass from Alabama. So there are some major problems between the two. And as Bobby has stated, they are in Parksville, but TVA has also found them in Watts Bar, Chickamauga, Nickajack, and from my information, they have been moved a little farther north. They haven't been found yet, but they are there. So we have a influence of alien invaders coming into our waters. And as Bobby said, on Allatoona, and Nottely and Chattooga, the smallmouth fisheries have disappeared because they're like this. They're big bowls of water. The spawning areas and the feeding zones are very limited. And a smallmouth bass of the same size will not outcompete an Alabama bass. They're just much more aggressive because they had to be naturally where they were. So it's just something we really don't want to see. Okay, back to the issue of the smallmouth limit. As I said, I am with the Tennessee Bass Federation. I represent a rather large body of tournament anglers. And generally, and this is me speaking, the 18-inch limit is the best thing that has ever happened to smallmouth bass fishing in East Tennessee. Because tournament anglers have moved the Kentucky spotted bass from their natural habitat to the lower end of the lake where they found a great place to live. The only problem was they were not destined to be there. So they've got this great place to live with food source galore, and they're so aggressive they will not be beaten down. At the Tennessee Chattanooga Aquarium, they cannot feed spotted bass and smallmouth bass in the same pen. The smallmouth will starve. Same size, they just get out competed. I was very against the 18-inch limit when it first came in, but over the years I've seen it actually work. And where large smallmouth and standard spots are combined, the larger smallmouth will outcompete them and can survive. And all anglers within the state of Tennessee have a chance to go catch these fish. If you lower the limits, all this work that we have done and waited for over the years is in vain, because once a 15-inch limit is in place, you won't see many fish above that limit. They'll get harvested out. The one advantage that everybody in the state has now is with an 18-inch limit, everybody has a chance of catching a 17, 18-inch fish. It's just, look out of the whole thing. And with the influx of the Alabama bass, we're going to see some dramatic changes over the next few years. And it's there. It's going to happen. So the longer we can keep these leak limits up, the longer we're going to have smallmouth fish in this state for everybody to catch. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the audience like to comment? Yes, sir.
I'm a little shorter than that. Can I move it? My name is Archie Wilson. I want to thank the TWRC for all the work that you guys do. I know it takes a lot of time, and I appreciate it. I want to thank TWRA for the work that they do. I'm an expert on absolutely nothing. I want to tell a couple of fish stories. Number one, there was an elderly gentleman fishing in his boat, and he heard a voice, and the voice said, "Pick me up." He looked around, he didn't see anyone. He heard a voice again, it said, "Pick me up." He looked in the bottom of his boat, and there was a frog in the bottom of his boat. He said, "Are you talking to me?" And the frog said, "Pick me up and kiss me, and I'll turn into a beautiful princess." The elderly gentleman picked up the frog and put it in his pocket, and the frog said, "Aren't you going to kiss me?" He said, "No, at my age, I'd rather have a talking frog." Now, our perspectives change depending on our experience. And I'm going to make a lot of my brethren mad. I'm a tournament fisherman, but I fish for everything. And I want to say I've spoken with a lot of guys that are fishermen and are non-tournament fishermen, and there's all different types of fishermen. A lot of the guys that are non-tournament fishermen, they want to go with what TWRA says. They have more experience. We have a different type of experience. Now, the other story I want to tell you is what I consider the greatest fish story ever told. It happened about 2,000 years ago, and I'm not preaching to you. I'm just telling you a story. You take it for whatever it's worth. But there was a group of professional fishermen that went out fishing. They toiled all night, the story goes, and they caught nothing. An expert arrived on the scene and encouraged them to go out again and fish. And they said they didn't want to. They were tired and they were grumpy, as fishermen tend to be, especially tournament fishermen. But they said, "Nevertheless, at your behest, we'll go out." And they went out, and he told them to cast their net on the right side of the boat. They cast their net on the right side, and they caught a draught of fishes that was so many fish that the net likes to break. Now, this coming from an expert, in my personal opinion, the creator of this universe, who said, now you can take this however you believe it, and again, I'm not preaching to you, you can believe whatever you want, but there's certain rules and laws that apply to our universe, and we need to study them. I side with TWRA. I think we need more time to study. I don't think a month is enough time to determine this. That's my opinion. Again, I'm an expert on nothing, but I would lean on the side of experience and data. And I know there's a lot of people agree with me. That's my opinion.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else from the audience? Okay, thank you. So what we have on the floor now is an amendment to reduce Cherokee, Douglas, and Tellico Loudon from 20 to 15 and 18 to 15. And the conversation's been that we want to at least give 30 days to get this out, that this is what the agencies, or that not the agency, but the commission is considering. Do you have any more discussion about that?
Bobby, I know our creel limit is 1 right now. Do you think upping it to 5 is gonna have a lot more impact? I mean, I know it's,
On Douglas for smallmouth,
yeah.
upping it to 5 and reducing it to 15 inches will have a pretty significant impact.
I mean,
on the quality of the fish. So there'll still be smallmouth bass. There'll be plenty of 15-inch smallmouth bass in the lake are adequate, but the bigger fish will not be protected.